Why did they all look at her that way? Why was every whisper in the courtyard a little louder when she walked past, every glance sharper, every laugh edged with suspicion? She had seen it before. Different bases, different uniforms, but always the same script. The assumption that she didn't belong, that her place among them was a mistake waiting to be corrected. The transport vehicle had barely rolled to a stop at Fort before she felt it. 23 men, 1 woman. The numbers always told the story before anyone spoke a word. Boots hit gravel. Duffel bags slammed down. Jokes were exchanged about marksmanship competitions and combat tour. And then there was stepping down quietly, cap pulled low, her expression unreadable. It wasn't fear. Fear had been burned out of her years ago. It was something heavier, something she'd learned to carry like a second skin, the expectation that she would fail. The sergeant in charge made no effort to hide his thoughts. Blackwood, his name was, all granite jawline and narrowed eyes, clipboard clutched like a weapon. He scanned the new arrivals as if they were suspects in a crime, pausing on her just long enough for everyone else to notice. Then he spoke, his voice cutting across the morning air like a blade. Half of you won't make it past the first week. A quarter more will quit before the month is over. What's left might have the privilege of calling themselves military snipers. His gaze locked on hers. It wasn't subtle. This isn't a program designed for accommodation. There's no special treatment here. The message hung in the silence. A few men nodded, others smirked. She didn't flinch, didn't give him the satisfaction of reaction. She stood at parade rest, duffel bag at her feet, eyes fixed straight ahead. What they didn't know was who she really was. What they couldn't see was the scar beneath her cap, the history written in a place no file had recorded. What they were about to learn, though not yet, was that she carried a name and a story that would change the entire course of their training. But for now, she was just. The first test came quickly. Weapons assessment. Field strip clean, reassemble, all under time constraints designed to make hands tremble and minds fumble. Most of the recruits moved with the clumsy confidence of men who thought they knew enough. Moved differently. Efficient. Methodical. Fingers gliding across steel with the ease of a pianist playing scales. Even Lieutenant, quiet and watchful at the edge of the range, noticed. His pen stilled on the clipboard for a moment. Blackwood, however, prowled toward her table. His eyes flicked across her weapon, searching for fault. Custom modifications aren't allowed in my program. Military issue only. Her voice was even. This is standard issue, sir. He inspected, scowled, tried again. Trigger pull seems light. 5 pounds 4 ounces, she replied. Within regulation. Something flashed in his eyes, not approval, irritation. He had wanted to find weakness. Instead, he found precision. She knew that look. She had seen it in instructors, commanders, even peers. The anger of someone whose bias had just been quietly. He moved on, leaving only the faint taste of hostility behind. When the day ended, she was assigned quarters at the far end of the compound, an afterthought of a wing slapped together for limited accommodations. Blackwood smirked when he announced it. Hope you don't mind the extra walk. No issue, sir. That night, alone in her room, she unpacked slowly. Few belongings. A uniform folded with care. A photograph slipped from a padded case, worn edges, faces caught in time. She stared at it longer than she meant to before setting it face down on the nightstand. Some memories weren't ready to be seen. A knock at the door interrupted. Lieutenant stood there, lean and unreadable. Settling in. Yes, sir. I reviewed your entrance scores. Impressive, especially your accuracy under stress. Thank you, sir. You know the program's history. Her eyes met his. That no woman has completed it in 8 years. Yes, sir, I know. Something flickered in his face. Not doubt, not belief, just acknowledgement. Make sure you know what you're up against. When he left, voices drifted through the half-open door. Instructors speaking low, thinking themselves unheard. 8 years since a woman made it through. Not for lack of trying. Blackwood makes sure of that. She closed the door softly, her jaw tightening. She had known, of course, but knowing didn't make it easier to hear. The next morning came with the sharp bite of autumn air. 24 recruits stood in formation at 500, gear strapped heavy on their backs. Fog clung low to the ground, wrapping the base in a ghostly stillness. Blackwood paced like a predator, eyes sharp, voice hard. This course will break most of you. Some of you will leave on your feet, others on stretchers, and some won't even make it through the first march. The hike began. 10 miles of punishing terrain, full packs digging into shoulders, boots slipping in mud, lungs burning on the inclines. By mile 5, 3 had already fallen behind. Stayed in the middle, not trying to lead, not willing to fall back. Her legs burned. Her breath came heavy, but she knew better than to let the pain show. At a steep incline, Blackwood appeared beside her, struggling. "No, sir. This is nothing. Wait until you're carrying a spotter scope and a rifle through a mountain pass. You won't last." Her voice was calm. "Looking forward to it, sir." He moved ahead, irritated again. By the time they reached the range, 3 recruits were gone. 21 remained. She wasn't among the fallen. Targets were set at varying distances, stretching out into the mist. The preliminary qualification, baseline assessment, no excuses. Talon, the golden boy, son of a soldier, grandson of another, smirked as he prepped his rifle. He had been watching her since day one, waiting for her stumble. He was certain it was coming. "Bet you 20 I shoot groups than you," he said when she passed. "I don't bet." "Smart," he grinned. "You'd lose." She didn't answer, didn't need to. When the firing began, the sound of rifles cracked across the range, sharp and rhythmic. She settled behind her weapon, feeling the weight of every eye. She heard her father's voice, quiet in memory, patience, position, precision, in that order. Her shots landed true, not perfect, not yet, but consistent, tight groupings, 5th overall, Talon first, of course. His smirk told her exactly what he thought. But it didn't matter. She wasn't there to win a pissing contest. She was there to endure. That night, as rain hammered the roof, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. Blackwood's voice echoed in her mind. Some people just aren't built for this. She knew what he wanted, for her to believe it. But then another voice rose, older, stronger, a memory of a hand on her shoulder, steady, firm, show them nothing until it's time. She exhaled, long and slow. Not yet, she thought. They don't get to see me yet. The storm outside raged on, and within her the storm raged too. Doubt pressing in, pride pushing back, the endless pull of 2 truths. She was alone here, and she was not unprepared. The time would come when they would see. And when it did, their laughter would fall silent. Why did the rain always seem heavier when you were already tired? It came down in sheets that morning, cold and relentless, turning the training fields into rivers of mud. Every breath felt sharp in the lungs, every movement slowed by water and weight. For some recruits, the weather was just another excuse. For it was a reminder. Excellence, her father once told her, doesn't wait for the storm to pass. It learns to breathe inside the storm. The obstacle course looked simple enough on paper. Crawl, climb, haul, sprint. But with 30 pounds of sand strapped on top of 60 pounds of gear, nothing about it was simple. The mud sucked at boots. Barbed wire tore at sleeves. Rope walls turned slick under the rain. Every recruit fought gravity and water as much as the course itself. Smaller frame worked against her. She had known it would. Pull-ups and climbs favored raw upper body strength, and the added sandbag made it worse. Still, she pushed through, one strained pull at a time, one drag of her knees through mud, one breath at a time. By the end, her uniform was soaked and caked, her chest burning. She crossed the finish a full minute behind the leaders. Blackwood stood there waiting, stopwatch in hand, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Struggling, this is just the warm-up. She straightened, forcing her breaths into control. Completed to standard, sir. Barely. He made a note on his clipboard, his lips twisting. 1 minute 17 slower than in combat, that's an eternity. She said nothing. What was there to say? The course was built to expose weakness, but weakness in one place didn't erase strength in another. She let the silence hang. Rain hammered harder as they moved on to the range. Wind gusted across the open field, snapping flags, shifting currents. Conditions no one wanted, and exactly the kind snipers were expected to master. 5 shots, Blackwood barked. 400 meters up to 800. Wind calls are your responsibility. Miss 2, you're on remedial. Miss 3, you're out. Eyes flicked toward, some subtle, others obvious. They wanted her to fail here where failure mattered most. One by one, recruits stepped to the line. The weather punished them all. Even strong shooters struggled, their rounds drifting wide under sudden gusts. Managed almost perfect groups, only one miss. Wavered, 2 misses at 700 but steadied at 8. Then it was her turn. She laid prone, rain running down her cheek, pooling in the hollow of her neck. Her hands found their places on the rifle. Her breathing slowed. And then his voice, close, too close. Adjust your stance, your fundamentals are all wrong. Blackwood crouched just behind her, louder than he had been for anyone else. She knew her stance was correct. She knew what he was doing. 10 seconds, he barked. A hesitation like this gets your team killed. Her first shot went wide. Laughter erupted from the line. His voice carried above the rest. Guess diversity quotas don't help aim. The others laughed with him. Blackwood didn't correct them. He didn't even hide his satisfaction. She felt it rising in her chest, not shame, not quite anger. Something deeper. The familiar coil of being set up, watched, doubted, waiting to be dismissed. It pressed against her ribs, steady and suffocating. She closed her eyes for 1 beat, 2. Then she did something she hadn't done all week. She removed her cap. The rain plastered her hair back, revealing the pale scar running along her temple, the one she usually kept hidden. Gasps rippled quietly through the line, though most didn't yet understand what it meant. She set the cap aside, her movements slow, deliberate. Her breathing shifted. In 4, hold 2, out 4, hold 2. A rhythm old as memory, one drilled into her by nights of training no one here knew about. She reloaded, adjusted not to his instructions, but to the crosswind flicking the flags. The rifle settled into her body like an extension of her own bones. The shot cracked. 400 meters, center hit. Murmurs spread. She cycled the bolt without pause. 500, dead center. The laughter died. 600, perfect. She didn't stop to see their faces. The wind flag snapped violently at 700. She shifted half a breath, fired. Center. Blackwood took a step back. For the first time, his certainty faltered. 800, the hardest distance with the storm at its worst. She squeezed. The round tore the bullseye apart, the wood itself splintering under the force. The range fell silent. Blackwood's clipboard lowered, his lips parted, his color drained. And then he spoke, voice barely audible against the storm. Your daughter. The name carried like a shockwave. Devon, a legend in sniper circles, record holder, instructor of instructors, the man who trained a generation of marksmen. His eyes stayed on her weapon, her breathing even. Lieutenant stepped forward, finally breaking his silence. Not just his daughter, Staff Sergeant, Silver Star, Operation, 3 days on overwatch without movement. Record shot at 1780 meters, saved an entire platoon. The revelation rippled through the ranks like a physical force. Jaw slackened. Blackwood froze, eyes darting between the folder now held and the woman he had tried to humiliate. Her file didn't list, Blackwood began. Cut him off. Her complete file, Sergeant, the one you should have received, the one that wasn't buried. Rose, methodical, securing her rifle. She met Blackwood's eyes, her voice quiet but unflinching. I didn't come here for special treatment. I came to make sure everyone gets equal treatment. No one spoke. The rain filled the silence, washing down helmets, dripping into eyes. For the first time, their assumptions lay broken at their feet, scattered like the fragments of the bullseye she had just destroyed. And though none of them said it aloud, one truth began to take root in every mind present. She wasn't there to prove she belonged. She was there to prove the system itself was broken. And she had just fired the first undeniable shot. What happens when silence speaks louder than rank? When a single moment tears down months, years of prejudice? The recruits didn't know what to do after the range. They had seen the impossible, a scar revealed, a name spoken, a history they hadn't guessed at. The laughter had dried on their lips, replaced by something closer to awe and fear. Blackwood walked stiffly ahead, at his side, clipboard forgotten at his hip. He didn't look back at her but could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. His career wasn't just rattled, it was cracking. The colonel's office smelled of leather and order. Maps on the wall, medals in precise rows, desk polished to a shine. Colonel looked up when they entered, his presence filling the space more than the decorations did. His eyes swept over Blackwood, then paused on. "Sit," he instructed. And sat. Blackwood remained standing, posture stiff as a rifle barrel. "At ease," said. Blackwood only half obeyed. The colonel lifted a folder, flipping it open. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it made each word heavy. "I've been reviewing Staff Sergeant's initial assessment. Disturbing reading." Blackwood swallowed but stayed silent. Set his glasses down. 6 qualified female candidates failed out of your program in the last 3 years, Sergeant. All scored in the top percentile on their preliminaries. All dismissed by you. Every one of your evaluations cited temperamental unsuitability or physical limitations. Care to explain that? Sir, The standards were applied unequally, cut in, sliding forward documentation. That's why Staff Sergeant was embedded. The silence deepened, kept her gaze steady, her hands folded on her knees. "Your assessment," asked, turning to her. "Systematic bias, sir. Both direct and indirect. Female candidates and several minority recruits received disproportionate criticism, less instructional support, and were subjected to different standards than their counterparts." Her voice didn't shake. It was clinical, measured like a report. Example, this morning's qualification. Sergeant Blackwood disrupted my concentration, imposed artificial time pressure not used with other recruits, and immediately judged my performance based on a forced miss. Patterns of similar conduct appear with Santiago and Washington last week. Nodded slowly. "And your recommendation?" "Program restructuring, sir. Standardized evaluation metrics. 2 instructor minimum on all assessments to prevent subjective bias. Removal of Sergeant Blackwood from his position as lead instructor." Blackwood's face flushed crimson. "Sir, with all due respect, Staff Sergeant has been here less than 2 weeks. This assessment is premature and—" "Consistent," interrupted sharply. "Consistent with 3 previous informal reviews that were buried." His eyes narrowed. "The difference is, credentials make her impossible to ignore." The words struck like a gavel, final, unarguable. Leaned back. "You've served honorably in many capacities, Sergeant. Your combat record is exemplary, but this program isn't just about producing snipers. It's about producing the right snipers, and you've been systematically eliminating qualified candidates because of bias." Blackwood's jaw clenched. "I maintain the highest standards, sir." "No," said quietly, firmly. "You maintain your standards, there's a difference." The meeting ended with a verdict. Blackwood would remain, but stripped of authority, placed under probation, would lead instruction, would serve as co-instructor and technical advisor. When they exited, the hallway stretched long and silent. Blackwood walked rigidly ahead, his shoulders heavy now not with power, but with consequence. He stopped once, turning to her, His voice was low, edged with something between resentment and respect. "Your father taught me. Advanced course 2009. Toughest instructor I ever had." Met his gaze evenly. He believed in one standard, equal for all, no predetermined failures. Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes, memory, maybe even regret. Then he turned and walked on. Back at the range, the recruits waited. The rain had eased, leaving the air thick with the smell of wet earth. They knew something had shifted, though they didn't know the details. Outlined the changes, standardized metrics, two-instructor oversight, restructuring effective immediately. Blackwood stood off to the side, silent, diminished. The recruits felt the difference instantly. The air wasn't the same. They no longer stood in the shadow of one man's prejudice. Approached her later, rifle slung at his side, his swagger gone. He tried for words. "Staff Sergeant, I want to apologize for what I said about women not having the attributes." Regarded him, not unkind but not soft either. "Were your words out of line because I turned out to be different than you assumed, or because they were wrong from the start?" He had no answer. Only silence and the weight of reflection pressing in where arrogance used to sit. "Something to think about," she said. Her tone was calm, almost instructional. "A good sniper questions their assumptions before taking the shot, applies to more than the range." That night sat at her bunk, unpacking the day in silence. She pulled the photograph from her nightstand, the one of her Silver Star ceremony, her father at her side. She hadn't shown it to anyone, hadn't needed to. But here, under the dim light, she let herself look, his hand on her shoulder, his voice steady in her memory. "Excellence doesn't argue, it demonstrates." She set it back down, face up this time. The storm had broken something open at Fort, not just in the program, not just in Blackwood, in the recruits themselves. For the first time, they began to see her not as an intruder, not as an anomaly, but as what she had always been, one of them. And maybe, in ways they didn't yet understand, better than them. How does respect begin? Is it won in an instant or earned one steady breath at a time? The recruits weren't sure. All they knew was that something had changed. The morning after the storm, the air over Fort felt different. Not softer, never that, but lighter, as if the weight of someone else's expectations had finally lifted. Blackwood stood at the range, silent, his clipboard tucked under his arm. Lieutenant gave the orders now, his tone clipped but fair. And beside him stood, not as a recruit, not as an outsider, but as something else entirely. The recruits stole glances when they thought she wasn't looking. Some curious, some ashamed, some eager. Gave her a small nod, the kind men give when words aren't necessary. Avoided her gaze, but he didn't smirk anymore. Outlined the day's drill, advanced wind-calling exercises. Targets at varied distances, flags set deliberately to confuse. No more baseline shooting. Now it was about mastery. When stepped forward to demonstrate, no one laughed. She lay prone, rifle aligned, eyes on the flags. Her breathing pattern was the same as the day before. 4 in, hold 2, 4 out, hold 2. The rhythm of someone who had learned to steady herself when everything else moved. She didn't explain every adjustment. She didn't need to. She squeezed the trigger. The round hit center. Only then did she speak. "Notice the front flag, not the one closest to you. That's the one that matters. The others will lie. Wind at your muzzle means nothing if it shifts mid-flight." They leaned in now, listening, even. She fired again, the shot tearing into the same place as the first. "Don't fight the wind, work with it. Anticipate, don't resist." Her voice was calm, but it carried more than instruction. It carried belief. That mastery wasn't about brute force, wasn't about proving strength louder than the storm. It was about patience, observation, respect for forces bigger than yourself. As the day wore on, the recruits began to change. Santiago, who had struggled under Blackwood's criticism, found his rhythm when showed him how to trust his instincts with numbers, letting calculations guide rather than overwhelm him. Washington, once on the edge of dismissal, steadied his breath under her coaching, his groupings tightening with each round. Even absorbed her corrections. She didn't humiliate him, didn't match arrogance with arrogance. She simply adjusted his stance, eased his shoulder, shifted his grip. He shot, paused, looked at her with a flicker of surprise. "That feels different." "It is," she said simply. "You're fighting yourself less." By the end of the week, the firing line sounded different, less frantic, more measured. The pattern of recruits who had once faltered began to shift toward something steadier. Colonel noticed. He visited quietly, standing at the edge of the range as coached Washington through a difficult wind shift. "Impressive progress," he murmured too, "especially with the ones who were nearly cut." "They needed teaching," said, "not judgment." Didn't look up, didn't break focus. Her voice carried softly across the line. "Trust your breath. Let the shot break when your body is ready, not when you force it." Washington fired, center hit. Allowed herself the smallest nod. That night in the mess hall, the dynamic had shifted. The tables weren't as divided. Conversations didn't stop when she entered. Sat with her openly, not as an act of defiance but as habit. Passed her on the way out, hesitating before saying, almost too quietly, "Your advice worked." She only gave a small acknowledgement, but it was enough. Alone in her quarters later, unpacked a second photograph. The first was her silver star, her father's hand steady on her shoulder. The second was newer, taken just days ago. Her with the recruits, Washington grinning, Santiago standing, half smiling. She set them side by side on the nightstand, staring at the contrast. Past and present, legacy and responsibility. But the silence of the room pressed in. The photographs reminded her of something she didn't want to face, the missions she had endured, the cost carved into her body and mind. Operation. 94 hours in freezing cold, motionless, waiting. The scar by her temple wasn't the only one. She touched the edge of the older photo. "Why did you push me so hard, Dad?" The question lived in her chest, unspoken. Was it for this? To be tested, doubted, dismissed, and still endure? Her eyes burned, though no tears came. She didn't cry easily anymore. The battlefield had stolen that from her long ago. The next morning she was back on the range, composed, unreadable. The recruits never saw the weight she carried at night. To them, she was stone. To herself, she was still piecing together what her presence here meant. One thing was certain, the program was changing. Encouraged technical mastery. Emphasized discipline, breath, patience. Blackwood's role shrank, reduced to observation and administration. His corrections now were technical, not laced with disdain. He watched sometimes, his jaw tight, as if caught between resentment and reluctant respect. Weeks passed, performance rose, metrics improved. Recruits once considered weak now thrived. And the unspoken truth settled in the air, was no longer being tested. She was leading. But even as the program bent toward progress, knew something else was coming. Another test, not of aim or endurance or patience. Something deeper, something tied not to her skill but to her past. The storm at the range had revealed who she was, but storms had a way of returning, and she wasn't sure this next one would leave her standing so steady. What does it mean to carry a scar no one else can see? Some wounds don't bleed anymore, but they keep whispering long after the battlefield has gone silent. For nights were the hardest. The barracks slept heavy, the sounds of steady breathing and the occasional cough drifting through the thin walls. But she lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, her body rigid with memories that refused to let her rest. In the darkness, she wasn't at fort anymore. She was back on a mountainside half a world away, snow biting through her gear, her body frozen into the earth itself. 94 hours. No movement, no warmth. Only the rhythm of her own breath, the pounding of her heart, and the knowledge that if she flinched, men would die. Sometimes she could still feel the weight of that scope against her cheek. Sometimes she could still hear the crack of that record-setting shot. And sometimes, worst of all, she could feel nothing at all, as if her body had long ago numbed itself against her own past. When dawn broke, she rose as she always did, quiet and composed. The recruits never knew what the night had taken from her. They only saw the discipline, the steadiness, the unflinching calm of someone they thought had no fear. But fear wasn't the enemy. It was silence, the silence of holding too much for too long. That day the recruits faced another endurance test, long-range surveillance. 6-hour observation posts. No movement, no noise, just patience. Most dreaded it, few understood it. Watch them settle into positions. Washington fidgeted, adjusting his scope too often. Santiago whispered calculations under his breath, shifted his weight constantly, his shoulders tightening as discomfort set in. She crouched beside them, her voice low, calm. Your body will beg to move, ignore it. Your mind will tell you the shot won't come. Wait anyway. The target isn't on your schedule, you're on theirs. They listened, but they didn't understand. Not yet. Hours dragged. The sun climbed and fell. Rain threatened again on the horizon. Washington began to twitch, his breathing uneven, knelt beside him. Focus on one thing, a sound, a rhythm. Control your breath. Anchor yourself to something steady. He nodded, forcing his breath to match her words. Slowly, the twitching eased. Santiago, lost in numbers, almost missed a subtle movement at his target line, tapped his shoulder, guiding his focus back. Don't overthink. Sometimes instinct is faster than calculation. Prideful as always, gritted his teeth against the discomfort, sweat beading at his temples. His aim began to drift. Crouched beside him, her tone firm but not harsh. Pain is temporary. Discipline isn't. Trust the position. By the time called the drill complete, most of them were exhausted. But something had shifted. They had glimpsed what it meant to wait, really wait, with patience carved from discomfort. That night caught up to her outside the mess hall. His voice was quieter than usual. How do you do it? Stay still like that. I thought 6 hours was bad. You did what? 3 days. She paused, her eyes drifting to the ground. For a moment she considered deflecting, letting the silence speak for her, but something in his tone stopped her. Genuine curiosity. Respect, not judgment. 94 hours, she said finally. He blinked, without moving. She nodded. You don't think about the hours. You think about the lives behind you, the ones who don't know you're there but trust you without even realizing it. Absorbed the words, his brow furrowed. He didn't joke, didn't push. He only nodded quietly. Later in her quarters, stared at the 2 photographs again, the past and the present. Her father's hand on her shoulder, the recruit standing beside her now. And she felt something stir she hadn't allowed herself in a long time, the question of whether she was still capable of trust. The next day tested that question. During a close-quarters drill, Santiago slipped on the course, his rifle striking the ground hard. Blackwood, still lingering at the edges of authority, was on him in seconds. Careless. That kind of mistake gets men killed. Santiago's face flushed with shame. The other recruits shifted uncomfortably, old habits of silence returning. Stepped forward, her tone measured but unyielding. It was an accident, correctable. Blackwood's eyes snapped to hers. Excuses don't build soldiers, Staff Sergeant. Neither does humiliation, she countered, her voice steady. Discipline isn't fear, it's correction with purpose. The recruits froze, the air thickened. For a long beat, Blackwood said nothing. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his jaw tight. Santiago looked at her, eyes wide with relief. Thank you. Shook her head. Don't thank me, learn from it. A rifle is your lifeline, respect it like you respect your breath. Something shifted again in that moment. The recruits saw more than an instructor. They saw an advocate, someone who wouldn't let them be crushed for the sake of someone else's pride. But it was more complicated. Confronting Blackwood wasn't just about protecting Santiago. It was about confronting the shadow of every man who had ever told her she didn't belong, every dismissal, every smirk, every door closed before she could even knock. That night, as the barracks settled and silence fell, she felt the weight pressing in again. The storm outside had quieted, but inside, her own storm hadn't. She remembered her father's voice. Excellence doesn't need to shout, it only needs to persist. But persistence came at a cost, and as she lay in the dark, eyes open, she wondered how much longer she could carry that cost alone. What happens when the test stops being about skill and starts being about trust? The recruits didn't know it yet, but their next trial would force them to lean on each other in ways they had avoided until now. The assignment was a simulated mission. Teams of two. One sniper, one spotter. 48 hours in the field with minimal supplies. Observation, endurance, precision, the kind of test designed to strip away comfort and reveal who you really were. The recruits loaded their packs in silence, the air thick with nerves. Rain had soaked the ground again overnight, turning the fields into heavy clay. Fog rolled low across the valley, obscuring visibility. It was the kind of weather that punished hesitation. Watched them, her hands folded behind her back. She knew what this meant. Pairing recruits wasn't just about skill distribution. It was about exposing weaknesses, about making them rely on someone they didn't yet trust. When read off the teams, murmurs rippled, with Washington, Santiago with, the matchups weren't random, they were deliberate, strength with weakness, confidence with doubt. And the unspoken question hung in the air, where did belong? Answered it, staff sergeant will rotate between teams, observe, evaluate. It was both a responsibility and a weight. She would be everywhere and nowhere, a shadow at their backs, unseen but felt, just as she had been on missions before. The teams set out. Hours bled into the first day, the recruits trudging through mud, packs digging into their shoulders. Santiago struggled to keep pace with, whose frustration leaked into every word. You're dragging us down. I'm calculating our pace. Forget calculations, move faster. Appeared at their flank, her presence silent until her voice cut low. A team is only as strong as its slowest member. Adapt to each other, or you fail together. Bristled but said nothing. For the first time, he adjusted his stride. Elsewhere steadied Washington, whose nerves threatened to unravel during their first observation post. His breaths came too quick, his hands too tight on the scope. Knelt beside him. Focus on the smallest detail, a leaf moving, a pattern in the mist. Anchor yourself. He obeyed, his breathing slowing, the scope steadied, the lesson landed. That night they set up positions. Rain seeped into their clothes, cold biting at their bones, complained under his breath. Santiago whispered numbers, trying to keep his mind busy. Hummed quietly, a rhythm to hold himself steady. Moved among them like a ghost. She checked their positions, adjusted angles, corrected stances. But more than that, she watched. She saw the pride giving way to fatigue, the arrogance softening into something closer to humility. In the dark, she found herself alone for a moment, sitting under a tree, her rifle balanced across her knees. The sound of rain on leaves pulled her back, not to fort, but to another night long ago. The mountain. Operation. 94 hours of silence, her breath frosting in the air, her body screaming for movement, and the voice of her father in her head. Excellence doesn't wait for permission, it persists. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself against the memory. But the scar at her temple throbbed as if it remembered more than she wanted it to. By morning, the recruits were restless, hungry, wet, and the real test began, moving targets at unpredictable intervals. Spotter calls, sniper adjustments, precision under exhaustion. Missed his first 2 shots, his frustration flaring. Santiago, calm under pressure for once, corrected him with sharp calculations. The next round hit center. Washington nearly broke under the stress, his scope drifting. Steady now, whispered encouragements grounding him. The round struck true. Observed it all, her eyes scanning, her voice only when necessary. Adjust your breath, trust the call, don't fight the fatigue, work within it. By the end of the exercise, the recruits looked different. Not victorious, not triumphant, but changed. They had seen that arrogance couldn't carry you, that calculation alone wasn't enough, that steadiness mattered more than bravado. Back at the range, debriefed them. Performance improved across the board, but more importantly, cohesion improved. That's the difference between a shooter and a sniper. A sniper survives because of trust. The recruits nodded, weary but thoughtful, even especially. Later, as the others filed out, lingered. He approached, his voice lower than it had ever been. "You saved me out there. When Santiago corrected me, I wanted to ignore him. But then I heard your words, about adapting, about questioning assumptions." Regarded him, her expression unreadable, and I realized I've been questioning the wrong thing. I kept doubting you, but maybe I should been doubting myself. She didn't answer right away. The silence stretched heavy. Finally, she said, "Doubt can be useful. It makes you recheck your aim. Just make sure it's aimed in the right direction." He nodded, almost humbled, and walked away. That night in her quarters, opened her rifle case. She traced the small engraving on the metal, "Truth finds its mark." She had added it after, a reminder that excellence didn't need to shout. It only needed to strike true. But as her fingers lingered over the words, she felt the ache in her chest again. The recruits were learning. The program was changing. Yet she still carried the silence of every mission, every sacrifice. The scars no one else could see. For the first time in weeks, she whispered aloud into the empty room, "Dad, was it worth it?" The silence gave no answer, only the steady drip of rain outside, falling like the hours she had once counted in the snow. What happens when the final test isn't about who can shoot, but who can endure when everything feels broken? That was the unspoken question as the recruits stood in formation, their uniforms damp from another long night of rain, their faces drawn with exhaustion. Colonel's voice carried across the courtyard, calm but edged with weight. "Your final field exercise begins now. 3 days, mountain terrain, minimal supplies, full combat. You will rotate positions: sniper, spotter, navigator, team lead. Success is not measured in kills. Success is survival, cohesion, precision under duress." The recruits glanced at one another. They had faced grueling hikes, obstacle courses, surveillance drills. But 3 days in the mountains was different. It wasn't just physical. It was psychological. The kind of test that stripped away everything you thought you were, leaving only what you truly were underneath. Stood at the side, her expression unreadable, but inside she felt the pull of memory. Mountains, cold, endurance beyond reason. She had lived it before. She still carried it. And now she would watch these recruits taste their own version of it. The teams moved out, packs heavy, boots sinking into mud that only grew thicker with the climb. By the second day, exhaustion carved lines into faces, hunger dulled reactions, rain seeped into every layer, tempers flared, mistakes. Washington stumbled on a steep incline, nearly losing his rifle, caught him at the last second, steadying him. "Don't drop it, ever." The words were sharp but not cruel. Notice the difference. A week ago would have mocked him. Now he caught him. Santiago pushed too hard, insisting on pace calculations even as his body faltered. Grabbed his pack, slinging half the weight over his own shoulder. "Math can wait. You can't." Watched, silent, her presence a steady reminder. She saw them breaking, and she saw them holding each other together. The test wasn't in the mountains. The test was in their willingness to trust. But Blackwood was there too, not leading, not anymore, but observing. His eyes tracked every failure, every weakness. He recorded notes, his jaw tight. For days, his silence had been a punishment in itself. He had lost authority, but he had not lost pride. On the third morning, as the recruits set up their final observation posts, Blackwood approached. His voice was low, gravelly. "You think they'll make it?" "They already have," she answered without looking at him. He scoffed. "They're wet, hungry, Half of them can barely keep their rifles steady. If this were combat, they'd be alive, she cut in, her tone sharp but calm. Because they've learned to carry each other. That's the difference. That's what you couldn't see. For a long moment, Blackwood said nothing. His gaze lingered on the recruits, his expression unreadable. Then he muttered, almost too quiet to catch, "Your father would said the same." It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it wasn't dismissal either. By dusk, the recruits faced their final shots, targets hidden deep in the mist, shifting with the wind. Each team had one chance, one bullet, spotter and sniper working as one. Washington and went first. Washington steadied his breath, whispering wind calls in his ear. The round cracked, center hit. Relief flickered across their faces. Santiago and followed, adjusted his stance, his shoulder relaxed the way had taught him. Santiago's calculations whispered fast but clear. The shot landed true, lowered his rifle, exhaling. Not bad numbers. For the first time, Santiago smiled. One by one, each team fired. One by one, each round found its mark, not perfect but precise enough. When it was over, the recruits sat in silence, the weight of the test pressing down, the relief of completion sinking in. Some laughed softly. Some simply stared at the ground. Stood before them, her voice carrying across the damp air. This wasn't about targets, or times, or scores. It was about trust. You don't survive out there alone. You survive because someone else steadies your scope, because someone else sees what you missed, because someone else carries your weight when you can't. Her gaze swept over them, lingering on Santiago, on Washington. You've learned that, and that's what makes you more than shooters. That's what makes you snipers. The recruits straightened, pride mingling with exhaustion. They had come expecting to prove themselves with bullets. Instead, they had proved themselves with endurance, with trust, with something quieter but stronger. Later that night, as they returned to base, walked alone along the edge of the compound. The storm clouds had broken, stars flickering through the gaps. She felt the ache in her body, the familiar exhaustion. But deeper than that, she felt something she hadn't in years: hope. Blackwood approached from the shadows, his steps heavy. He stopped beside her, his eyes fixed on the stars. For a long time he said nothing. Then, "I was wrong." She didn't look at him. About what? About you, about them, about what it takes. He paused, his voice catching. Your father, he used to tell me the same things. I didn't listen. I thought standards meant breaking people until only the strongest remained. But strength isn't always loud, is it? Finally turned her head, her expression unreadable. No, sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it's the shot no one sees coming. For once, Blackwood didn't argue. He only nodded, his jaw tight with something unspoken, regret, respect, maybe both. When returned to her quarters, she opened her case again. Her fingers brushed the engraving. Truth finds its mark. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, truth was finally finding hers. But as she lay down, her eyes drifting shut, she knew the story wasn't over. The program had changed. The recruits had grown. Blackwood had bent, if not broken. Yet the question lingered in the dark, pressing against her ribs like an old wound. How long could one person carry the silence of scars before it demanded to be spoken? What does victory look like when there are no medals, no parades, no headlines? At Fort, it looked like 19 recruits standing than they had weeks before, rifles slung with a new steadiness, faces marked not just by exhaustion but by pride. Graduation morning was clear, the first truly blue sky in weeks. Flags snapped in a brisk wind. Families stood in the back rows, some craning their necks to see their sons, their brothers. A few glanced curiously toward the end of the line where one woman stood among them, uniform pressed, expression calm. Colonel spoke first, his voice carrying the authority of a man who knew the weight of his words. You began this program as individuals, competitors, strangers. Some of you began with doubts about yourselves, about each other. But today you stand as graduates of one of the most demanding courses this military offers. And more importantly, you stand as a team. Applause rippled through the crowd. When it died down, Lieutenant stepped forward, reading names, handing out certificates. Each recruit stepped forward in turn, saluting sharply before taking their place again. Washington, steadier now than he had ever been. Santiago, his confidence no longer buried under numbers. His quiet strength unmistakable. His arrogance tempered into something sharper, humbler. And then she didn't step forward. She wasn't listed. She wasn't graduating. She was observing as she had been from the beginning. But when's eyes flicked toward her, he gave the smallest nod, a gesture seen only by her. It was acknowledgement, respect, and a thank you without words. After the ceremony, the recruits clustered together, some with families, some alone, approached, hesitating as if still unsure of himself. "You know," he said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it, "if you hadn't been here, I don't think I'd have made it." She regarded him, her expression even. "You made it because you chose to listen, because you chose to adapt." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Still, I'll remember what you said about questioning assumptions, about aiming at the right thing." "Good," she replied simply. "Then you've already learned the most important lesson." Washington approached next, his hands gripping his certificate tightly. "I thought I'd fail out. Honestly, I almost did, but you saw something I didn't, so thank you." His voice softened just slightly. "Don't thank me, trust yourself. That's what will keep you alive." Only gave her a nod, the same kind of nod he had given her on the first night in the mess hall. But this time, the respect in it was unmistakable. Later, in the quiet of her quarters, packed her belongings. Her movements were methodical, precise, as always. She lifted the 2 photographs from her nightstand, her Silver Star ceremony with her father, and the newer one with the recruits, faces proud, standing taller than when they began. She placed them carefully into her case, side by side, past and present, legacy and proof. As she closed the case, her fingers lingered on the engraving on her rifle. "Truth finds its mark." There was a knock at her door. She turned to see Blackwood standing there, his posture less rigid than it had ever been. His eyes held something she hadn't expected, humility. "I won't waste your time," he said quietly. "I've been wrong for a long time. I thought breaking people proved strength. But you showed me different. You showed them different. I don't know if I can undo everything I've done, but—" He hesitated. "I'll try. I owe your father that much. I owe you that much." Studied him for a long moment. Silence hung between them. Then she nodded once. "Then don't say it. Do it. Let the next class see what you've learned." He inclined his head, a gesture of respect. "Fair enough." Then he turned, leaving her in the quiet once more. 3 days later stood at another base, another range. Fort this time. Another program in need of change. Another group of recruits, including a few women standing uncertainly at the edges, their faces wary under the weight of doubt she knew too well. She watched them, her rifle case at her side. She could already feel the glances, already hear the whispers. She knew the story would begin the same way it always did, with silence, with suspicion, with the expectation of failure. But she also knew how it would end. Because excellence doesn't argue. It doesn't demand permission. It doesn't wait for storms to clear. Excellence persists. It breathes through rain, steadies itself in silence, and proves itself when no one expects it. As she stepped forward, her voice carried across the range, calm and certain. "Fall in." The recruits straightened, their eyes on her. Some doubted, some waited, some hoped. His gaze swept over them, steady as the scope she had once held for 94 unbroken hours. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And truth, when finally given its chance, always finds its mark.